Welcome to the Wholehearted Eating Podcast, where non-diet nutrition, weight-inclusive care, and integrative health collide. We're your hosts, Dana Montes and Christina Hoyt, licensed integrative clinical nutritionists and body image coaches.
And we believe you deserve to have a joyful relationship with food in your body, even if you have a chronic health condition or symptoms that just won't quit. On this show, together and with our guests, we're bringing the real talk, no BS vibe with tangible tools to help you pursue health and wellness without obsession or restriction.
Remember our disclaimer, this podcast is meant for general information purposes only and should not be taken as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. We have another nutrition wellness trends episode coming at you today with a side of breaking down the pseudoscience and what is real and what is not. So today we're going to be talking about cycle syncing and then also just a lot more general information on women's menstrual cycles and how our hormones fluctuate and kind of how that can affect our bodies throughout the month. And then with that, talking about this kind of phenomenon that has actually been around for almost 20 years, I would say at minimum, but it's getting a lot more traction within the last year or two. So we wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I also think, too, I just want to state as well, is that the idea of syncing with your cycle is not remotely new. This has been
just
done.
The trademark cycle syncing.
Yeah, the trademarked cycle syncing is like a new thing, and like the modern capitalistic view of it is definitely new. But the idea of syncing your cycle with, you know, nature and your body and being in sync with your body and your cycle and honoring that as a female or a person with a uterus is like like not new, like not even new, even remotely new. But you know, we as a culture really love to take things and then make a little money and money off of it. But I will say with cycle syncing, one of the things that I find nice right now is that I do find it rather refreshing to see more information and research going on about women's cycles and more discussion around women's cycles and being able to sync and understand it and more education around it. I mean, we learned about some of this stuff when we were, you know, in sex ed, if you had sex ed in your elementary school, not everyone even had that, but like we did, but we didn't really learn that much about it. And even in school, Dana, like when we did our master's program in nutrition, it was 1-day class. And I always thought that was mind-blowing to me because most of the people out there hiring nutritionists and 90% of our class were females.
And most people who are nutritionists and dietitian are women.
Exactly. That's what I mean. It's like most people in our class were women and most people who hire nutritionists are also women. And so to me, like the fact that we don't talk about this is kind of mind-blowing. So in a way, it's like kind of refreshing. And then I'm kind of like, but why do we have to take something to such an extreme and then create such an orthorexic productivity kind of vibe on top of it when what could be something really beautiful and special to be able to sync with your body, understand your body and all these different things and all the different aspects of it and things that are at play is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And why do we got to go and like muck it all up?
Yeah. And this is actually really funny because I don't remember what year we did this, but if you all have been with us for a long time, way back in our Facebook group, we did a book club discussion of this book called Woman Code, which is by the creator, quote unquote, of the trademarked cycle syncing, aka bringing syncing your cycles with your food and your movement and all these different things into a capitalistic society and making money off of it.
And, you know, a little bit diety, you know, if you will, like super diety in a lot of different ways. And
this was one of our main issues. And oh my gosh, I wonder if I can dig up that audio somewhere. I may have deleted it because, spoiler alert, we hated that book. Oh my gosh, it was so orthorexic. And I mean, really like not diagnosing, but borderline eating disorder of the prescriptions in that book coming from someone who is unlicensed. So that was wild too. I remember going through that book and us being like, how are they able to make what is happening? What claims are they making? What research? And again, no research in the back of the book. So it's like, what are we even doing? So
and I think a lot of it too was that one of our biggest problems is that they were really talking about disease prevention in there too, which we were like, how are you not trying to practice medicine? And how is that not wildly unethical? Like, how have they not gotten flagged or gotten in trouble in the state of New York where they are? How have they not been flagged for practicing medicine in their practice, the way that they go about doing it? And yeah, I mean, it's shocking. Yeah.
This is not going to be an episode just, kvetching,
No.
about any certain person. What we wanted to do today was talk about like, what is cycle syncing in the way that is mostly talked about in the media. And I mean, if you Google cycle syncing, you will mostly find wellness blogs because if you search PubMed or Google Scholar or anything, you will not find a single research article. So what we wanted to talk about is, what is this phenomenon that people are talking about, and what are kind of the pros and cons, right? What can we take away from this, and how can we get some good information and get some practical tips that if you wanted to input some of this, especially if you have any kind of hormonal dysregulation, PCOS, endometriosis, PMDD, PMS, all the things, any of the above, even more that we didn't mention. If there are certain things here that you wanted to try to put into place and see if it works for you and aids in managing your symptoms, awesome. But how do we do that in a way that is not wellness productivity checklists, that is, I have to do this all or I'm a complete failure and now I have all the tools, and if I don't do it, then my symptoms are my fault? How do we stay away from something like that? Because the way that this information is presented, especially on these functional medicine type wellness blogs, all of the things, is very all or nothing. I'm giving you the tools, and so now you must do it. Otherwise, you're never going to have a happy menstrual cycle. And it's like, can we just leave the dogma at home, please?
And I find it to be particularly frustrating too, because I get it. Like, I really get wanting, like, why this would be so alluring if you come across it on Pinterest or if you see it on TikTok or your favorite influencers starting to do it. Because if you have something like PMDD or fibroids or endometriosis or something like that, typically, if you're going to a traditional OBGYN to manage these types of things, all you're given is hormonal birth control.
As your only option. Yeah.
It's really the only option. And that just doesn't feel like an option. That feels like not enough information. And so I can understand why you're going and looking into this and thinking like, okay, maybe this is what I need to do in order to manage this stuff and feel better, because those symptoms that you're experiencing are awful. And no one does anything about women's female health and our menstrual health and talking about, they usually just brush it off and say, oh, this is normal. And like, oh, okay, is it normal to be bleeding this much? Is it normal to be this tired? Is it normal to be this depressed during this time of year and like during that time of the month and everything like that? Like, why is this so like brushed off all the time? And so it makes sense and it's logical that when you would see something like cycle syncing, you'd be like, oh shit, this is kind of cool. Maybe this is what I need to incorporate in to support myself. And then if you go and read all these things, these people are like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. I've healed, blah, 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 blah. And I'm doing that with like a slight eye roll and all of the different things. It makes sense that it would be something that you would be like, oh, wow, I want to try this. And if you're listening to us, you might be thinking, no, you guys are missing the point. Cycle syncing is awesome. It saved my life. And we're also not discounting that either. You may really, really love it. And we're not saying that using the tools and the education that's available around this research and around supporting females' hormone cycles isn't valid and also useful.
Well, actually, there's no research, but
well, no. Well, I'm talking about the research of like our hormones.
Yes,
like understanding our hormones, not the things that are being pouted on like on top of it. It's more of like the research of understanding what is happening hormonally throughout the month is what I mean. But I feel like when you look at that, how do I take this newfound education that I have, and how do I apply it in a way that might be supportive for me, and how could this be helpful alongside the other modalities that my OBGYN is recommending and other things like that. Because I'm not going to speak for Dana, but I don't not think that food matters,
You can speak for me there. You know that.
I know that, but I just don't want to put words in your mouth. We know that food matters. We know that making sure that your body gets what it needs nutritionally is going to help your body function. Like, we don't disagree with that. We also don't disagree that understanding what's going on in your body helps you make informed, intentional choices about how to support your body. No one's questioning that. What we're questioning is, why do we got to take something and then put a bunch of gobbledygook next to it and then say, this is what you have to do at each one of these things, which to me is not intuitive, which is not honoring your body, which is not respecting your body cycle, and isn't actually understanding it. It's telling you to listen to something external rather than turning internally.
It's interesting because it's trying to put forced rules on what should be, quote unquote, your intuition and your body's natural cycles. And so this is kind of where we want to get into it. So if you don't know what cycle syncing is, if you haven't come across this on the broadness of the internet, it's basically, the concept is modifying lifestyle habits like your food, your movement, other what we would consider health promoting behaviors with the phases of your menstrual cycle. Now, the disclaimer of this is not as, the tools here are not as applicable if you are on some kind of hormonal birth control. So if you're on the pill, if you're on the IUD, if you have a patch, if you anything like that, or if you are pregnant or newly postpartum, right? The other thing about this, if you don't have regular cycles, you can still use tools like these, but it's obviously harder to be in sync with your cycle if you have a very inconsistent one. So the, quote, typical menstrual cycle for a non-hormonal cycle, non-copper IUD cycle, is going to be between 25 and 38 days. So if your cycle is kind of outside of that window, that doesn't mean that you can't use this information. It just means that the kind of windows are going to be a little bit more stretched out. And we're probably going to share some graphics on this of, what the typical menstrual cycle looks like and where the hormonal fluctuations are and stuff like that. And so before we really get into what are the pros and cons of cycle syncing, what are the kind of main takeaways and everything like that, we wanted to do a little bit of education on what are the 4 different phases of the menstrual cycle and what's actually going on with our bodies. Because, even if you had this in sex ed in like 5th grade or like 8th grade or something like that, I don't know about you, but I remember 0 of that. And most women receive very, very little education on what is going on with their body in accordance with their menstrual cycle. Like, most people know of estrogen as a hormone, and like maybe you've heard of progesterone, and like if you've either tried to get pregnant or had a kid, you're probably a little bit more familiar with this. But if you haven't, then it's like, well, I know I bleed or I don't. And it's like, I don't feel awesome right before that happens, and I don't feel particularly great during Shark Week. But besides that, I don't really know what's going on, right?
During Shark Week, that's really funny.
That's what my friends and I call it, Shark Week. Kind of what it feels like, right? Oh, I think it's funny. I love saying that at the gym. Like, I'm not feeling great. It's Shark Week. And all the girls are like, yeah, I get it. And the guys are like, what?
It's like, yeah, don't you watch
it's like National a little code.
Geographic?
They're like, Shark Week isn't until the summer. What are you talking about? Like, Shark Week is every month, my guy.
Hey, friend, we got sharks every month. You know what? I don't know. I don't really call it anything.
I'll send you a GIF afterwards. It's great.
I will tell you, though, that I'm so open about it in my house that Elodie is aware. And Elodie will say, Mommy, are you bleeding from your vulva again? I'm like, well, it's from my vagina. But yes, I am bleeding again. Yeah, it's happening. And I was like, and someday you might be blessed with this, too.
More likely than not. Yeah.
Yeah, more likely than not. But no, it's so funny. But no, I do talk about it with Elodie already, because I'm like, no one ever talked to me about it when I was little, really.
Yeah. Well, I think that is part of it, right? It's like women's things are like shameful, and especially for like our mom's generation and before that, it was something to be hidden, right? And that's probably part of the reason why there's, until recently, like really 0 research on menstrual cycles and how they impact different things, because it was a, quote, women's issue. And so it's like, God forbid we do research on women. And I feel like we've said this so many times in recent episodes, but it really is true. If you look at the general body of research and the amount of research that has been done on men versus the amount of research that has been done on women, there's a huge disparity, to no one's surprise.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, not a shocker. So what we're saying is it's okay if you are listening to Dana's next little thing about the different phases and what's going on, and for you to be like, this is brand new information.
Yeah.
It's totally 100%. Okay. And we are just saying we're going to provide some little graphics for you.
Yeah.
And so that you can look at it and kind of get an idea and understand it a little bit better. And we'll share our own little wholehearted eating version of what you can do to support yourself.
Yeah. And I think, we have this little table that breaks it down for us that we made. I think we'll share that over in Patreon just as a quick reference. So if you're like, I got to write this down, don't worry about it. We got you.
Don't worry about it. You'll be able to see it. All right, Dana, run us through the phases.
Okay. So we're going to start with Shark Week, aka your period, aka the menstrual phase. So if you didn't know, This is actually a really big one that a lot of people don't know. So if you're counting, when does my cycle start? It's the first day of your period. So if you're counting, how long your cycle is, and you don't really know, because a lot of people assume, well, it's actually the end of my period. No. It's the very first day that you have sharks. For the first phase, the menstrual phase. So for everybody, this is different. Like the amount of time that you bleed or spot or any of that stuff can be around, and we're going to be giving like rough estimates of like the amount of time that these phases last. Typically, when information like this is given, it's in the span of a 28-day cycle. So approximately days 1 to 5, but I want you to think about this as kind of like a flow chart, basically. So, funny flow. So, your period might only be 3 days, right? And then your next phase will start sooner, right? Your period may be a little bit longer than that. Unpleasant, but longer, right? And then your next phase will start a little bit later. So just keep in mind there's like kind of a range around which you can transition into the next phase of your cycle. So in your menstrual phase, your period phase, what your body is doing is shedding the uterine lining, which is very energy expensive, which is why you may be hungrier during your period. So during this time, as you're shedding the uterine lining, which is why you bleed, your hormone levels are falling, namely estrogen and progesterone. So those two are going to be low. So what we can look at, and this is where cycle syncing comes in, is the informational piece is telling us in accordance with shedding the uterine lining, which is very energy expensive, aka you're going to be more tired, and estrogen and progesterone are low, we're going to lose in that phase a lot of the benefits that estrogen and progesterone can bring us. So when we look at cycle syncing or even just neutral information, like what is going to be happening with our bodies in accordance with estrogen and progesterone going lower, what can we typically expect at this phase in our cycle, right? You're going to have probably the lowest energy of your entire cycle. You're probably going to be more introverted. There's kind of more going in energy of like, I don't really want to be bopping around when I'm shedding my uterine lining, not really feeling great, right? You probably are going to have...
that's natural to want to just hang out at home.
Exactly.
Stay close to home.
Right. There's a little bit more moodiness. You may notice GI and sleep changes, maybe some appetite changes. I mentioned before, you may be more hungry because shedding your uterine lining is energy expensive, right?
Yeah. And think about what you're doing here, guys. You're literally shedding a part of your body every single month, and it expends a lot of blood. When you lose blood, you're losing energy, you're losing iron, you're losing all of these different types of things that are helping us get energy. And so, of course, you're going to have lower energy during your cycle. That doesn't make any sense that you wouldn't, because naturally you would be, because you're losing iron, and iron helps provide us with a lot of energy. So to me, it seems like one of those things that we need to keep in mind. And I think sometimes those are those things like, why am I craving all these things? I'm like out of control. And let's bring a lot more grace to it and understanding here around what's actually happening during Shark Week.
Yes, exactly. And like libido and sex wise, you may not feel in the mood at all. You might. It's totally normal either way. As we have been talking about and we'll be continuing to talk about, everyone's cycle presents totally differently. What you can pay attention to is what is normal for you. And then when you see major deviations from your normal, that's when it's time to pay attention to things. Be like, maybe some things are out of whack here. And then just a fun side anecdote is if you are in the mood, orgasms can help with cramps because of all of the nice hormones that come from those. So
I was thinking this is what's happening to us during that time and how we might see things. But one thing that I really want to note too, just something to remember, is that everyone's shedding is different and the amount of shedding is different for each person. And so I think sometimes when we read about cycle syncing, we think being asymptomatic is the goal. And that would mean like you're going to have like a really light cycle, or it's going to be really easy and whatever, or you're not going to have any lower energy, or you're not going to have any food cravings. And those are all the things that you're going to be wanting to quote unquote fix. But to me, I think it's really important to remember that like each person's cycle and that period week and the amount that you're shedding differs.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes there are points when it's like, oh, wow, that is a lot. Maybe that's not really where we want to be. Like if you're anemic, or if you're like, you're
if
bleeding,
it's disrupting your life. Yeah.
Like wildly disruptive. Those are the things that we really want to pay attention to and say, like, what is my body trying to tell me about this? But I just want to make that known before we go into the next phases, that this time period, people think a lot about like, oh, how this is quote unquote supposed to be. And any deviation from that is problematic. And I think we need to take a little bit more, make that problematic, like, look a lot broader, and open that up a little bit and really look at the wide varying things. Like, one, I'm not getting a cycle. I'm not bleeding. Okay, what is your body trying to tell you here if you're not bleeding? I'm bleeding a lot. Okay, what is my body trying to tell me? Do I just feel like I have low energy and I'm feeling a little moody and I maybe have a little bit of loose stools? That might be completely normal and expected for your body to happen. But we have this idea when we go into cycle seeking that all of those things need to be corrected. And so I think that's just something to kind of remember when you're going into that. But we can go into the follicular phase now too. But you know what we didn't talk about is cramps a little bit. And I don't know if we should take like a hot sec to talk about cramps, or should we not talk about cramps? What do we think? Should we wait till we're all through to the phases, guys?
I mean, really, cramps can happen at any time of the month.
That's
but
true.
yeah, for most
I get mine
people,
when I'm ovulating, so.
Well, yeah. I mean, so yeah, we'll talk about that too. And like when you have a major hormonal shift in your life, whether it's pregnancy, postpartum, something like PCOS, endometriosis, PMS, PMDD, like all of these different things that we talk about, thyroid dysfunction, you're burnt out, you're having GI issues, all of these things can change when these different types of symptoms happen in your menstrual cycle. But most of the time you will, as you become more informed, you'll probably notice, oh, I feel significantly different at different times of the month. And for some people, especially with like a lot of the clients that I work with endometriosis, the worst time of the month is around ovulation. And the best time of the month is something where for someone else is actually the worst time of the month. So that's just something to keep in mind. But with cramps, most people notice cramps like leading up to and directly when they're on Shark Week. And sometimes they're manageable and sometimes they are not.
Okay. Phase 2.
Yeah.
Phase 6 through 14. Roughly,
Ish.
we're saying ish, right?
Yeah.
Everyone has different
Basically,
phases.
Between when you're having Shark Week and between when you ovulate or when you would ovulate.
When you would be ovulating. I think, so this is our follicular phase, and Dana and I are going to be doing this really fun thing on social media where we're going to have each phase with a Disney character. And we've been referring to the follicular phase as Tigger because this is usually when we're higher in our energy and all the things. But this is when estrogen rises to a peak. And so we kind of have this trigger release of an egg for ovulation. And then the phase ends when the egg is actually released. So this is like when there's that release, but you have a lot of estrogen. And so with that, you're going to have increased energy. You're going to be a little more confident. You're going to maybe have a slightly lower appetite because we're not shedding a bunch of lining. And so we maybe don't need as much. You might naturally have a lower sex drive. You might be a little bit stronger in the gym, things like that. All these different types of things that you might start to notice during that time frame because of that estrogen starting to increase. Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about what might be happening, if something to notice during this phase? Or is this kind of like when we're just kind of hanging out in good energy vibes?
Yeah, I mean, this is basically this is for a lot of people, this is a good time of the month in the sense like you're feeling pretty focused. And we're going to do a whole nother episode on the intersection between certain chronic health conditions and inflammation and maybe even executive function and ADHD in the menstrual cycle. So this is kind of just like a first
series.
overview. Yeah. But generally people feel pretty good in this phase. They do have more energy. You have pretty focused energy. You can get things done. It's easier to be productive, right? And so with cycle syncing, they might be like, this is the time to grind and like, this is the time to do all the things. And it's like,
this is when you're going to see the hustle time. It's like,
Yes.
this is the time to hustle. This is the time to do all your quote unquote hit exercises.
yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah. We forgot to talk about that. So part of cycle syncing, and I think we'll get into this later too, is with the exercise piece, it'll say, depending on the cycle of or the part of the menstrual phase that you are in, you should be doing only specific types of workouts. And that is bullshit. What we can take is knowing that if there are certain phases of the menstrual cycle when you are more tired, give yourself more grace. Don't run yourself into the ground, right? Or if you're doing your regular routine of maybe you're going to the gym, maybe you're running errands, maybe you're doing stuff with your kids, maybe you have crazy work days or travel or whatever. If you're more tired that time and you're in your menstrual phase, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Don't beat yourself up about it. That doesn't mean that you're only allowed to do restorative yoga or something like that. Whereas when you then get to the follicular phase, they'll be like, oh, this is a great time to do strength training and stuff like that. But then if you're acutely and perfectionistically following cycle syncing, it's basically saying the only time that you can do strength training is in the follicular phase, which is bullshit, right? We're trying to learn this stuff from the wholehearted eating perspective so that we can be more informed about what's going on with our bodies so that we can have a little bit more of a compassionate approach of understanding of like, oh, that's why I'm feeling this way, and like, you can use this information if you're an athlete or if you're a gym person or something like that. It's like, oh, wow, I'm feeling more energy. Like this might be the week if I've been planning to like try to run a PR in my mile or something like that. Cool. That might be a great time. Might not be a great time if it's the right day right before your period or the first day of your period. Probably not going to be a personal best. It might be, but it might not. And that would be entirely normal, if not expected, right? So this is where really we're just trying to give you guys this information so that you can give yourself a little bit more grace, have a little bit more understanding. And this information is also really interesting because it's almost counter the like go, 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 grind all the time, never stop working. Beyonce has 24 hours in a day. So do you. Yeah, Beyonce probably has a menstrual cycle too. So she's probably not like, Beyonce also doesn't have to do everything for herself because she's rich and she's got a whole team of people. Regardless, we say this all the time. But let's go on to ovulation.
So, ovulation is when your body releases an egg. Fertilization can occur during this time. So if you are trying to get pregnant, there's a lot of things that you can do and you are actually fertile during that entire 6-day window. But if you're really trying to get pregnant, and I don't recommend that anyone just start doing this, but you can actually track your ovulation if you've noticed or you've had a hard time being able to find out when you actually are. There's a lot of things that you can do to support yourself to learn what your ovulation window is and what that looks like if you've been having a difficult time with getting pregnant. But that's a whole nother topic that we're not going to get into today. And that is not an invitation for everyone to go out and get a bunch of ovulation sticks and start obsessing over it. So, but one thing that you might notice is that you might have a little bit more pep in your step. You might feel like you might be feeling yourself, a little bit more. You might be a little bit more confident. This might be the week where you're kind of like, my clothes are feeling great. I'm not really feeling like my body image stuff isn't coming up pretty hard. I'm feeling really good. And maybe you have an increased libido. Maybe you're hitting the gym a little bit more, or you're feeling more social or wanting to do stuff with your friends and like doing more things. But I think there's definitely a level of like, you might find that your clothes fit more comfortably, or you don't notice the discomfort as much as you once did during this time. And I think that that's something that a lot of people will kind of notice. And you might notice, like, why does my body image like fluctuate so much throughout my cycle? This can be why. It's because our body is doing different things at different times during the month. And you might notice, like, why can't I feel this way all the time? Well, that's because there's actually mechanisms at play that help kind of feed into that. And the more we can bring compassion to that and understanding, we can then say, like, oh, it's okay. This is just a phase. It's just going to last for a few days. It's natural that I'm feeling this way, or I'm just going to ride this wave. And maybe today is the day that I try an outfit that's way outside my comfort zone and I rock it and have fun, and being able to honor that with yourself a little bit.
Yep. Important note here too is that your body doesn't always release an egg here at ovulation. And especially if you do struggle with infertility, you may not be ovulating. You may not be releasing an egg, and that can happen for a lot of different reasons, even if you're not trying to have a kid. And like we had mentioned before, there are certain health conditions for which their symptoms are actually worse during ovulation because estrogen is rising to a peak, and then because progesterone is also starting to rise. So again, there's a lot of variance in all of these different parts, and it's just helpful to have more information. And if you're completely confused, we're going to have the table for you, so don't worry about it.
I mean, I would be shocked if you weren't confused. We've been bouncing around a lot, and there's like a lot of segue stories that are going on throughout this entire thing too. So don't worry, guys. It's all going to be laid out to you in like a nice, pretty little map. But what we want you to do is take away each part and understanding that there's going to be different things happening at each time of the month that might be unique to you. But based off of how our hormones function, this is what can happen. And these are things that you can expect and see happening too. And this is why people get really psyched on cycle syncing and the idea of cycle syncing, because there's a lot going on here. And who wouldn't want to kind of have the high confidence rise last longer, or trying to minimize some of these symptoms that they're having during these other periods of time because they're simply inconvenient to have sometimes, and I think that's something to remember.
Yeah. And I don't think we mentioned this, but ovulation is typically around days 15 to 17, 18, something like that. But again, it happens at a different time for everybody. So going into the last phase, which is luteal, and this is a little way that you can remember this stuff, is follicular is first after Shark Week, and then luteal is last right before Shark Week. So this is the last part of your cycle from about right after ovulation, so around day 18, all the way up to you start Shark Week. So it happens after ovulation and either ends in a period or ends in a pregnancy. And so in this part of the month, your estrogen is low and progesterone is high. So going along with that, you're going to have a little bit less energy. And even within the luteal phase, for a lot of people, it seems like there are different phases within this, because how you feel right after ovulation is typically very different to how you feel right before you get your period. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But basically, the closer you head towards your menstrual cycle, the lower energy you're going to have because your body is preparing to shed the uterine lining. You're going to have lower confidence. You may have increased appetite because, again, preparing to shed the uterine lining is also energy expensive. And there's more of an energy of kind of slowing down or sometimes like nesting. This is also typically where the most amount of PMS symptoms will hit within the week or for a couple of days leading up to your menstrual cycle. So thinking about mood swings and cramps, breast tenderness. Sometimes there's lower back pain. A lot of people notice GI changes during this time. You're typically going to have more emotions, or if you're like, why am I suddenly crying at movies? It's probably almost your period. So it's not you being emotional, it's your hormones. So
You know what I was just thinking about as you were talking about this? Like, this is, if you were to try to sync to this, to every whim that changes throughout your entire cycle, you would have to become obsessive. right? You'd have to be monitoring it so obsessively and with a fine-tooth comb in order to be able to support it in all ways. And then the other thing I was thinking about too, so I had that quick little brain blast. And then the other brain blast I had was, you know how many times I hear clients of mine comparing their food intake and changes to their male partners or male friends? And I think to myself every single time, guys, stop looking at your man's plate and comparing what they're eating to what you're eating. They are not going through all this. They are not having all these different types of hormone changes. They are not shedding shit for a whole week like we are. They're not building up to shedding stuff. They're not trying their body, whether you want to or not. When you're having your menstrual cycle and your female hormone cycle throughout the month, your body is trying to prepare you to have a baby. That is completely different. Whether or not you want to get pregnant or not, that's what your body is trying to do.
And then it recycles everything out at the end of the month.
Yes. And your body is doing this thing. And that is not what's happening with men. Men are not going through the same type of thing. And when your body is trying to prepare your body to carry a pregnancy and to carry a baby, you know how much stuff it needs? You know how much nutrients it needs? You know how much energy it needs? It's made me think of that, Meg Dahl just recently did an Instagram reel with comparing her plate to her partner's plate or whatever people are doing. And I have this conversation a lot of times with my clients. And I think to myself, dude, you guys stop looking there, because their bodies are doing something entirely different than your body is doing. Your body's agenda is entirely different than their body's agenda. You cannot compare the two things. And so stop trying to go for the small plate and eat all dainty in front of them. You need to fuel yourself, take care of yourself, and eat, because your body is doing a lot of freaking work, guys.
And that goes for any time of the month.
Yes. Think about all these different things, all these different phases. You might naturally fall into different times when your appetite suppresses or increases or whatever, right? But the most important thing for you to remember is this is what our body is doing. And our bodies are primal. Whether we live in a very modern society, right? With all these different things. But at the end of the day, our bodies aren't as evolved as we are. And it is trying to do this, whether or not you're trying to get pregnant or you're not. It is trying to do this. And so we have to honor that a little bit. And that's what we want to pay attention to. Support your body. Don't try to suppress it by trying to squash it down. But also don't obsess over this and make it everything you're doing and follow every single rule and look at it and try to obsess, because that's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. So again, the way that we recommend using this information is that, yeah, there are going to be times of the month where you have more energy. There are going to be times of the month where you have more libido. There's going to be times of the month where your body image is probably going to be naturally worse, and other times of the month where your body's probably going to be naturally a little bit more increased, right? There are going to be times of the month where your genes fit better because you're having less bloating and less GI issues. That is a natural side effect and occurrence given the hormonal levels that are shifting, right? So this is a way of getting more in touch with your body via information. Now, where this goes extremely sideways is when we start to become very, very perfectionistic about it and basically pigeonholing yourself into a set of rules of, oh, I'm in my menstrual phase. I'm only allowed to do these things. I should only be doing these things. I'm not allowed to do anything outside of this. And we haven't really even gone into the food side of this yet, but it can get very, very, very prescriptive. And we're not just talking, oh, you should be only eating certain types of foods in your menstrual cycle to support detoxification and blah, 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 which that's fucking bullshit. But aside from that, it's also, I remember when we were reading that book, it was recommending these ridiculously low calorie amounts in certain times of the month. And we're like, that's half of what a toddler eats. What are you talking about?
I know. They were so intense.
Oh my gosh. But it's just, it gets extremely perfectionistic, overly prescriptive, very restrictive. And it's on the one hand, you could use this information to be very supportive to your body of like, oh, that's why things feel that way. And like, yeah, maybe I should take a break today, or this is a really great time of the month to start a new project, or I'm going to be a lot more creative during this time. And I can be mindful of that. Aside from, well, I'm in the follicular phase, so I might as well be doing HIIT workouts at the gym, and I should be eating blah, 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 like all this stuff. And you all can see if you just Google cycle syncing, you can easily go down the rabbit hole of craziness. And we don't recommend that. But if you are curious, the information is there, not on PubMed, but it is on wellness blogs. And actually, there's a lot more information about it on websites like Time and the New York Times and other stuff like that, because it has been such a phenomenon over the past year. But, we recommend you do your due diligence, and really, like anything, this is really just people trying to capitalize and make a ton of money off of a vulnerable population of people, which we hate. And if you listened to our February Patreon bonus episode, you will know exactly what we're talking about with somatic workouts and other stuff like that.
But yeah, I think the thing is what gets frustrating for me as someone who really loves and appreciates the idea of understanding that our bodies are connected to the moon cycles and different things like that, and understanding and the whole idea of red tinting and all this like really beautiful history around all of this. What gets me really frustrated is that what could be really accessible and beautiful and a cool thing to align with and start to learn more about becomes obsessive, and then becomes kind of like this hierarchical kind of thing,
and totally whitewashed and all this other stuff.
And food and how it's integrated and everything like that. Like, yeah, our hormones are recycled at the end of the month, each month, which is like a beautiful process that we have. And how can we support that? By adding things in, not like, I'll tell you one thing, your body is not going to be doing anything right if it's freaking starving, because it can't do its job when it doesn't have the energy to do it. So it's not going to be recycling. You're not going to be doing these things. So when I see things like in that book where it was those calorie counts and those types of things, it's like in direct violation of the intent of the information that they're trying to utilize.
It's also so stupid, because if you eat that little consistently for a long time, your menstrual cycle is probably going to go away. So it's extremely counterintuitive. It's wild. Again, I'm going to be honest, I don't do this often. I threw that book away. Most of the time, Christina still has it, which I find hilarious. But it was so funny because anecdote-wise, I remember reading the first probably 30, 40 pages of this book, and I was like, wow, this is great, because it was purely, this is understanding more about your cycle. It's more of, the type of information that we were giving in this episode today. But this was, probably 8 years ago or something like that, 6 years ago or something like that. But then I remember there was just one page, and it was like, given this information, here is how we take advantage of this. And it was so orthorexic and so prescriptive. And then it was like the 500 calories a day or something like that. And we were like, what is happening? What is happening? And then I remember us looking them up and trying to see like, what is their background? What is their bias? What are their credentials? Oh, nothing. We're like, what? What is happening? Oh my God. Yeah. So don't even bother. I wouldn't even pick it up at the bookstore and flip through it. Not worth your time. I don't even know if it's in bookstores anymore.
Yeah, I don't know either. I'm sure it's on Amazon. But I think one thing that I want to say as we kind of wrap up here, regardless of the book, you may still listen to this and be thinking to yourself, but guys, I really do want to support my cycle.
Yeah, and there's some great things that you can do there in a non-orthorexic, non-perfectionist, non-shaming way.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about more of those as we get into different things that might be happening too. But I think the major takeaways that you can have from this is honoring your body's signals and cues as far as your energy, and then honoring it, right? Like if you're having a lowered energy, don't force yourself to go to the gym that day. That's not the day for that. That's the day for you to respect your body and rest. If you're having, increase in appetite or you're feeling really low in energy, well, guys, energy begets energy. So maybe that means that we need to start to incorporate some things. Maybe when we're shedding our lining and we're, in Shark Week, maybe that is a good time to add in something like a steak dinner, man. Like, and like really help flood yourself with more nutrients that are going to be supportive of bleeding for a week straight. I mean, if we take it and think about it logically in that perspective, what could be supportive? And so I want you to think about it from like, not so much of what do I have to remove or change, or
what am I allowed to be doing? Yeah.
What should I be doing or allowed to be doing during this time? But instead thinking about how can I support myself during this? And what is my body trying to tell me? And how can I utilize the language of my body and understanding my body more, and how my hormones are changing throughout the month and throughout my cycle? And how can I honor that? How can I give myself a little bit more compassion and grace when I'm feeling uncomfortable in my body? Maybe that would be an indication of, hey, I think I might actually be in this phase here. That makes sense. Okay, this is not the time to jump into a hard and fast, like, restricted diet or throw away all your clothes and think that everything's awful. Maybe we honor that and say like, hey, maybe this is the week of leggings, or maybe this is the week of really cute sweat sets. And maybe this is the week of the jeans that fit a little bit like this next size up that I have for that week during my life. And I honor that a little bit. So I think that those are the types of things that I think you can do in a really loving way for yourself to honor your cycle and to actually cycle sync, more than it is about here are all the things that I have to do and create this like orthorexic, over the top productivity checklist that you're then getting stressed about, which takes away from the way your cycle functions and being able to honor it. So, we're always trying to move everyone's stress. So let's try to take a step back and think about what can I do to support and what is my body telling me?
Yeah, and we know this is a very complex topic and very nuanced topic in the way that we're, recommending certain things and actively recommending against certain things, basically just perfectionism, right? So we'd love to hear your questions. So you can contact us at Wholehearted Eating Pod on Instagram. You can find both Christina and I on Instagram as well. You can email us at hello@wholeheartedeating.com. If these episodes have been resonating with you, we would absolutely love it if you would leave a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can leave a rating. Cool thing about Spotify is you can actually now leave questions directly under the episode, which is super cool.
I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Yep. So you can do that and we'll get notified about it, which is awesome. And then we can do a follow-up episode on it. If you want, even more deep dives on our episodes and stuff, you can join us over at patreon.com/wholeheartedeating. And that's all the places. We'd love to do some follow-up content on this. And we're already planning to, but we'd love to do some more follow-up content if you have questions about it too. So let us know.
See you next week.
Hey friends, it's Dana, and thanks so much for listening to the Wholehearted Eating Podcast today. Find us on social media at Wholehearted Eating Pod on Instagram and at wholeheartedeating.com for more information about working with Dana and Christina for one-on-one nutrition counseling. If you love the show, we would love you forever if you'd share an episode with your family and friends, or tag us on social media, or leave a 5-star rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts to help more people find the show. Check out patreon.com/wholeheartedeating to help support the show and get access to ad-free episodes, bonus episodes with us and our guests, episode discussions, new resources we're creating for Patreon, and so much more. If you have questions for us, feedback on the show, potential topics or guests you'd love to have on, shoot us an email at hello@wholeheartedeating.com, and we'll see you next week.